An argument goes on between our side, the Indian side, and the Pakistani side over who are the perpetrators of the horrible Pahalgam massacre. On the Indian side, we have no doubt that this was some front for the Pakistani ISI and the army, some terror front. Most likely, in fact, the Indian agencies would believe almost 100% this is TRF, the so-called the Resistance Front, which is a new name for Lashkar-e-Taiba. As we had told you earlier, in this case, the Pakistanis have discovered a proxy for a proxy. So if Lashkar-e-Taiba is a proxy for the Pakistani army and ISI to carry out proxy war in India, after the pressure from Financial Action Task Force, FATF, pressure became too intense and Pakistanis really needed to get off it to be able to get their IMF bailout, etc. They said that LET is now over. It's finished, it's buried, doesn't exist. But LET was not going to be buried. LET then re-emerged as the resistance front. And just a couple of days back, I had given you many examples of terror attacks carried out in Jammu and Kashmir, which had been claimed, the responsibility for which had been claimed by the resistance front, TRF. In this case, they made that claim first, but probably because the Pakistanis and their bosses also realized that this had gone too far and this will trigger a response from India and they needed plausible deniability. They now got TRF. They had not got TRF to withdraw any such claims earlier. But in this case, because this attack probably had become too big for their own comfort and they were beginning to get worried, they got TRF to withdraw it, to resile from it, putting out one more statement saying that we had not made that earlier statement. Indian intelligence had hacked our website and they issued that statement from there. That is what we know so far. What are we talking about then today? What's happening right now is that for the past couple of days, Pakistanis have raised a few more issues or questions, and that has caused quite a bit of confusion. In fact, the idea is to cause confusion, to throw as much smog in the air as possible, so people get confused, people start arguing on the sidelines or on the tangents of the central point, which is that Pakistani terrorists carried out this act or who carried out this act. So they've raised 2 points or 2 questions. In fact, more accurately, I would say they've raised one allegation and one proposition. Now, it is not for me to answer what the Pakistanis are saying. That is what Government of India does, MEA does. They have good spokespersons and they are doing a good job of it. So keep tracking them, listening to them. However, what is my job? My job is to cut the clutter, which is precisely what the Pakistanis have done in this case. They've created clutter. This is classical disinformation. When you find yourself in the corner over a really troublesome issue, then you bring in extraneous issues and also make offers that at the minimum need to be discussed. So the other side is then distracted from the central point, and then you can also confuse international opinion. So what is the allegation the Pakistanis have made? The allegation they've made is, as you would expect, that the Pakistanis never did it. The government of India has given the Pakistanis no evidence that Pakistanis have done it, which means it must be a false flag operation carried out by Indian intelligence agencies to blame the Pakistanis and to create a warlike hysteria in the country. That's one thing. The second thing they've said is a proposition, which is that if you really think that the Pakistanis have done it or you don't know who's done it, then let there be a neutral inquiry. Let there be a neutral inquiry. It can be carried out by any organization or any institution that we jointly name. It can also be one of the UN agencies. Let there be a neutral inquiry. And then the argument on the Pakistani side is, if India keeps saying no to the neutral inquiry, which obviously India will, then it means that they have a guilty conscience. That means they don't want to be caught because a neutral inquiry may show that they are the ones who carried it out. Now, the Pakistanis have also added a second dimension to this. They are saying there should be a neutral inquiry into the Pahalgam massacre and also the hijacking and massacre of the Jafar Express over a month earlier. Again, you make the connection. The connection is the Pakistanis are trying to say that they are also victims of terrorism in their Baluchistan for which they've been blaming India. So one, they equate the two, that there was a massacre on our side, there is a massacre on your side. Let there be one neutral inquiry that decides who's responsible for what. And once again, the argument from the Pakistani side is, look, if Pakistan is willing to offer itself to a neutral inquiry into Balochistan, that means Pakistan is quite sure that they haven't carried this out, right? But if India refuses to accept a neutral inquiry into what happened in Pahalgam, that means it is India that is hiding something that it has done. So that is the allegation. In this episode of Cut the Clutter, I will reverse the order of the 2 points as we discuss them. So let's first talk about the proposition: a joint inquiry, a neutral inquiry. Look, trust depends on your track record. I will only give you two examples, two of the earlier significant terror attacks in India, say 2008, 26/11, the biggest so far, and 2016, the Pathankot attack. Just as the year started, 2nd January 2016, that was just a week after Prime Minister Modi had surprised the world by breaking journey in Pakistan on his way back from Kabul to wish Nawaz Sharif on his birthday, and also on his granddaughter's wedding. Right? And then it looked like that he and Nawaz Sharif were picking up the thread again. Just the previous year, he had invited Nawaz Sharif for his swearing in, and looked like they were picking up the thread again, because Nawaz Sharif had been involved in many rounds of peacemaking with India under different prime ministers, because Nawaz Sharif has always had that approach that India and Pakistan have to have peace and a settlement. This process had started. Within a week of this, Pathankot Air Base in India was attacked. I had mentioned this earlier also. God forbid if that attack had been successful, and if the attackers had been able to either damage some aircraft, or maybe harm some of the air crews, etc., that would have become a very big issue, maybe would have even led to a war. Fortunately, that did not happen. Indian forces also fought the attackers, intruders. They were sent there in time. There were casualties. There were 7 security people died on the Indian side, but all terrorists were killed. Now, this obviously was a sabotage of the new peace process between Nawaz Sharif and Narendra Modi. So India said in this case, because there was a good beginning made already between Modi and Nawaz Sharif offered to participate in the investigation. He offered to participate in the investigation. India accepted this because India had given evidence to the Pakistani side of phone calls, of other communication, DNA samples of the attackers who were killed, etc. And Pakistanis also accepted that something like this had come in from their territory. India blamed Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Pakistan offered to participate in the inquiry in an unprecedented move. Government of India under Narendra Modi, under Modi 1.0, agreed to have a Pakistani investigation team come into India and set up a joint investigation team with the Pakistani team on the other side of the Pakistani FIA, which is the Federal Investigation Agency, a bit like the CBI in India, and the Indian NIA, National Investigation Agency, which looks at terrorism cases. So Pakistani team spent some time in Delhi. They also spent some time in Pathankot. They were also taken to the Pathankot Air Base, where they spent some time, not that much, but they didn't have to walk around the airbase. This action had taken place only in one corner of a very vast airbase. This joint investigation team had people from the ISI, Pakistani ISI, military intelligence and intelligence bureau, and the Punjab counter-terrorism team. In fact, the head was from there, Tahir Rai. On the Indian side, there was the NIA. Between 27th March and 31st of the same year, this team visited Pathankot. It also spent time in Delhi. It examined evidence, documents, witnesses, DNA samples, I told you, call records, and it spent 55 minutes on the site. Obviously, nobody was going to give them a tour of the entire airbase. This action fighting was only on one side of the airbase, near the perimeter wall. So they also visited that side of the airbase for about 55 minutes. They also examined Punjab Police SP Salvinder Singh, remember, whose SUV had been hijacked by terrorists, and also a jeweler, Rajesh Verma, who had got caught up in this situation. So, all of this was done. Once the Pakistani team went back, the Pakistani side even registered an FIR in this case, which showed a certain degree of sincerity that they wanted to address this. Now, this went on in Pakistan for some time. This was a new experience for the Pakistani establishment, because in this case, an elected prime minister, not with the full majority of his own as he got elected, he was just about short. So quite a stable government, which was completing the second half of its term. The government had been elected in 2013. We are looking at 2016 now. That prime minister was asserting his authority and telling his army, his military and ISI to cooperate and to complete investigations, not just in the Pathankot attack, airbase attack, but also in the 26/11 attack. And that looked like his sincere wish. This tug of war went on between him and the army/ISI to the extent that in October that year, a story appeared in Dawn newspaper, respected newspaper in Pakistan, Dawn, that said that the Prime Minister now had given a firm order to the military and the ISI that they must cooperate and get to the bottom of this. In fact, the expression used by Dawn in its story was, and I quote from there, blunt, orchestrated, and unprecedented warning that if you don't do it, they'll be held to pay. Now, that is not something that Pakistani military and ISI are used to being told by merely an elected prime minister, because you know where the power resides in Pakistan. And when an elected prime minister says such a thing to the military and the ISI, the reply usually is, to jaan, usually in street language we'll say, janta nahi mera baap kaun hai. In Pakistan, the reply would be, tu janta nahi tera baap kaun hai. So that set of a process, where one, the Pakistani agencies stopped cooperating in this investigation. They wanted more details from NIA, etc., which were not forthcoming. These were unreasonable demands being made, because by now, India knew that the Pakistani side were stalling instead of Nawaz Sharif trying. This story in Dawn is what is famously or infamously called Dawn leaks, for which members of Nawaz Sharif's cabinet were blamed. Some had treason cases thrown against them, his ministers and advisors, and the establishment tried to discredit this story to the extent possible. But in any case, they had started the operation to get rid of Nawaz Sharif. So on 28th of July 2017, within months of Dawn leaks, when he had just been completing the fourth year in power, he just had a year to go, Nawaz Sharif was removed through that ridiculous court order. Remember that Sadiq and Amin order, because he might have done something which was probably not corruption, but maybe he lied, so he's not trustworthy. But because he's not trustworthy and truthful, according to Pakistan's law, anybody who's not Sadiq or Amin or truthful and trustworthy can be prime minister. So using that pretext, they removed him. His government continued. They forced his party to appoint another prime minister who was just a flower pot. He counted for nothing. And that is when the ISI and the military completely disowned the Pathankot probe. So now what happens? A joint investigation is promised. A joint investigation is carried out. In the process, the investigation is blocked and the prime minister loses his job. Now let me take you back to 2008 and 26/11. 26/11, initially the Pakistani said, we have nothing to do with it. In fact, they were leaking stuff in their own media then, saying that these were perpetrators were Indians and maybe some Bangladeshis, right? But the fact is that India had phone recordings, Americans had phone recordings. There was a lot of data available, lot of evidence available, and for heaven's sake, there was Ajmal Kasab available. With all of that, it became very difficult for the Pakistanis, but they were holding out. Nevertheless, 26th of November, the attack started in Mumbai. They held out through the month of December in this complete denial. On 7th of January, Pakistan's National Security Advisor, Major General Mahmood Durrani, he's somebody whose name I mentioned to you in the past. He was also a member of a Track 2 group which worked on normalizing relations between India and Pakistan. In the Pakistani Urdu press, he was often mocked as General Shanti. He was now the National Security Advisor. January 7, 2009, he made a statement saying, look, this is the reality. We cannot keep denying it. Ajmal Ahmad Kasab is a Pakistani national. How can we deny it? Let's make clean breast of it. Now, the fact is that until now, Pakistani government had said, even though the name Ajmal Ahmad Kasab and other details had been sent to them, they said, we don't know who he is. In fact, no such name exists in our national identity database. Pakistan has had a national identity database decades before our Aadhaar came in. So they said such a name doesn't figure in our database, so the person is not Pakistani, doesn't exist. Now their NSA said it. Now what happened? When the NSA said it, and that was a time, initially, Pakistani government had even promised to send the ISI chief to Delhi to help with investigations because they knew what a big attack it had been and what implications it might have. But once again, in that case, while the elected government said they will send the ISI chief, again the powers that be intervened and ISI chief did not come in spite of the announcement being made. Now, the NSA made this statement. What happened after that? You would have thought this is the government's own NSA saying this. That means the government is now coming clean on this. No. Within hours, Yusuf Raza Gilani, who was then Prime Minister, the government then was with Pakistan People's Party. Although it was a coalition because Nawaz Sharif's party also had a large number of seats, but Pakistan People's Party was running that government. President was Zardari. Yusuf Raza Gilani was the Prime Minister. Yusuf Raza Gilani made a statement saying the NSA is not in sync with others in the system and is speaking out of turn. And immediately the NSA was fired. So what happened in each case? In one case, you actually offered a joint inquiry, let the Pakistanis also come in, which is unprecedented, but the Prime Minister ended up losing his job. In the other case, you promised to send your ISI chief, who didn't come. You promised to send your ISI chief, and that was thwarted. But your NSA, who spoke the truth, he was fired within hours. So after this experience of the Pathankot attack and 26/11 attacks, to expect that India will trust another offer of joint inquiry or a neutral inquiry is really poppycock. Nobody in India would buy into any of that. Even the fact that India trusted the Pakistanis with a joint inquiry in 2016 is quite remarkable given the history of 26/11. And that in spite of the fact that this was a Modi government, a full majority Modi government. After the second betrayal, it's impossible even for the Pakistanis to think that anybody in India would buy this. However, why are they saying this? They are saying this so they can go around the world and say, look, we are offering a neutral investigations. If Indians are not agreeing to it, that means they must have something to hide. I will only give you a footnote to this. Pakistan did arrest a bunch of Lashkar-e-Taiba people after 26/11 attacks. Those were all released in quick time because they said there were charge sheets, etc., fired, but they said they could not find evidence against anybody, right? Even from the Indian side, the voice samples that India said of what they had overheard, they said these are not valid in court. In the court, they said that people they had charged refused to give their voice samples. The investigator there, investigating agency chief, the FIA chief, Tariq Khosa, he sought an exception that under new laws, 2013 laws, it was not necessary for them to give permission for their voice samples to be recorded. But the court gave him no accommodation and those people remained free. Only towards 2021-22, when the pressure from FATF became extreme, at least one of them, Sajid Mir, was the number 2 person, the deputy chief of Lashkar-e-Taiba. In April, May 2022, that far down the road, he was arrested. He was arrested within 3 weeks. Within 3 weeks, he was convicted. The trial was held. Within 3 weeks, he was handed out a conviction for terror financing. Conviction with 15.5-year sentences. Those are really long sentences. Just a 3-week trial in an anti-terrorism court. Just 3 weeks. no tarikh pe tarikh in this case because they really wanted to show action to FATF. Simultaneously running, but 15 and a half years. Why did that happen? Because that had to be concluded. Now Pakistan was in real urgency. They had actually declared him dead in December 2021, but now the FATF sword was hanging on their necks. And until they showed action on Lashkar-e-Taiba, FATF was not going to lift them out of the grey list. That's how they quickly arrested him, held this trial within 3 weeks, convicted him, and handed out this stiff sentence to him. Besides him, nobody has been punished. Then came the pretense and the disinformation that Lashkar-e-Taiba is banned. It's a proscribed organization. It ceases to exist. However, not enough was quote unquote found against Hafiz Saeed, and similarly, not enough was found quote unquote against Masood Azhar, although at various points of time his name has been mentioned in the charge sheets. Now we've handled the proposition aspect, the neutral inquiry aspect. Let's come to the allegation. Allegation that India carried it out itself. False flag operation. Now, what's a false flag operation? This goes back, actually, the term goes back to naval battles in the 16th century, when one side put the flag of the rival side on one of its own ships, and so it could sneak into the other side, right? That is how the word false flag has come in. Nations, intelligence agencies have carried out false flag operations, and there is a whole documentation in archives. By its very nature, a false flag operation, by its definition, a false flag operation has to have a strong underlying cause, a strong underlying cause or motive or an objective. In this case, just on facts, what motive would India have? India is quite stable. Pakistan is unstable. Kashmir in India has been peaceful now for many years. Millions of tourists are going there. So Kashmir is in a very good place. How does it suit India to create fresh trouble in Kashmir? How does it suit India to create a warlike mood? That is the allegation being made on the Pakistani side. And we are not headed for any elections. Narendra Modi's government is not losing popularity. If anything, his popularity is very strong. As J.D. Vance said on his visit to India, that Narendra Modi's affirmative ratings are so high that he feels envious on him. So there is no logical reason for India to have done such a thing. Besides the fact that the Pakistanis have no evidence that India did it, they are saying it only to befuddle their own people, and also hoping that somehow this will get into international media's debates or discussions. They will use this idea or this allegation also to confuse the international community. In fact, whenever there is a whiff of such an operation, you look for motives. In fact, if anything, many of the things that the Pakistani side earlier had painted as false flag operations have now also been exposed, particularly after the investigations, after the Americans, the Indian side, everybody joined in together in the post 2611 investigations. If you read the testimonies of David Coleman Hadley, first to the NIA, he was in the custody of the Americans, and this is a testimony to the NIA with American intelligence officials present there. There he said, for example, that Lashkar-e-Toiba boasted to him that they had carried out the Chitty Singhpura massacre. Chitty Singhpura massacre, where 38 Sikhs were killed in a village by this name, Chitty Singhpura, while Bill Clinton was on visit to India. Once again, many on the Pakistani side are saying that was a false flag operation. David Coleman Hadley has clearly stated in his testimony that top Lashkar leaders boasted to him that they had carried out that massacres. Further, in his long video testimony to a Bombay Special Court, where he was cross-examined by lawyer Ujjwal Nikam, he also said that another encounter case around which there was a lot of controversy in Gujarat, the Ishrat Jahan case, that was also a case in which genuine Lashkar-e-Toiba people were involved. So these facts have come out of David Coleman Hadley. However, if I circle back to 2611, Pakistanis, while they pretended to cooperate with India on the investigations, never told India about David Coleman Hadley or Tahabur Rana. In fact, so confident did Tahavur Rana and David Coleman Hadley feel that after doing all this, David Coleman Hadley came back to Bombay, scoping Bombay for more operations. And then he went back to Pakistan and then planned an operation. Both of them planned an operation in Denmark, in Copenhagen, in the office of Jyllands-Posten, the publication which had carried the offending cartoons on the Holy Prophet. It was while he was planning that the two British go-betweens he met in London, they turned out to be undercover MI5 people. And that's how on the Five Eyes network, MI5 alerted the Americans and he was arrested and Tahavur Rana was also arrested. That Tahavur Rana is now answered more than a few questions to Indian agencies in New Delhi. Truth to tell, if they had not got so overconfident and so reckless and they had stayed on in Pakistan, they'd probably be quite safe now and the entire story would not have unraveled as it has after they were caught in America.